The night the notification came through, I was making mac and cheese, the good stuff the kind Sarah and I used to splurge on when we first got our apartment. It was 9:47 p.m. I remember the time exactly because I was watching a rerun of an old sitcom and thinking, man, I need to get to bed soon if I'm going to be sharp for the all-hands meeting tomorrow. Sarah had texted me about an hour earlier. Stuck in the office, huge push on the Miller account. Don't wait up, babe. Love you. Typical. She'd been pulling these late nights for weeks. We both work at the same private financial consulting firm, though in different departments. I'm in risk analysis. She's in corporate strategy, which means she deals directly with the clients and, more importantly, directly with Alex Davies, our boss. I just finished draining the pasta when my phone buzzed on the counter. It wasn't a text or a call. It was a subtle, almost invisible ping from the Find My Friends app. I know. It sounds completely paranoid, and trust me, I felt like a great creep when I set it up months ago. We initially did it because she tends to lose her phone in Ubers, and it was a safety thing. Lately, though, I'd been checking it more out of pure, low-grade anxiety than concern for her lost phone. I just needed to see the little blue dot sitting stubbornly at the office building downtown. It was my nightly, strange ritual of reassurance. I picked up the phone, wiping my hands on a dishcloth. My stomach dropped, not like a quick jolt, but like a slow, deliberate elevator plunge from the top floor. The blue dot wasn't at the office. The office is about a 15-minute drive from our place. This new location, it was in a completely different, much fancier part of the city. Specifically, it was tagged to the Olympus Tower. If you live in this city, you know that building. It's all glass and steel, 30-plus stories of pure, ridiculously expensive condo units. And I knew exactly who lived on the 28th floor of the Olympus Tower. Alex Davies. The little blue dot was undeniably, sickeningly still, right over the address for his building. She said she was working late. My brain was running a frantic denial loop. Maybe the GPS was glitching. Maybe she was meeting a client there. Maybe she just stopped by to drop off a file for Alex and was waiting in the lobby. I frantically checked the timestamp. 9:46 p.m. A minute ago. She hadn't been to the office at all. Her office work was happening 45 minutes across town, at the one location on Earth that could absolutely shatter my reality. I zoomed in on the map, my thumb shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone into the boiling water I just drained. The blue dot was centered directly on Alex's unit number, according to the map's internal zoning. It wasn't the lobby. It wasn't the ground floor coffee shop. It was there. The air felt thick, heavy, suddenly suffocating. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white. All the minor, nagging worries of the last few months suddenly coalesced into the single burning point of absolute terror. The late nights, the sudden defensiveness about her phone, the quick pecks instead of deep kisses. I had rationalized them all away as stress from the new account. Now they were bricks raining down on me, one after another. I took a deep breath, trying to be logical, trying to find the one impossible explanation that wasn't the obvious one. But there was no logical explanation for my wife, Sarah, being inside my boss's lavish, bachelor pad condo at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night when she explicitly told me she was crunching numbers at the office. The lie was the thing that hurt the most. The cold, calculated lie. She didn't just say she was busy. She specified a location that wasn't the actual location. A strange, detached calm washed over me, the kind of stillness that comes right before a total mental breakdown. I put the lid back on the mac and cheese pot, placed it in the fridge, and cleaned the stove, all on autopilot. My body was moving, but my mind was stuck, staring at that small, glowing blue, like it was the event horizon of my entire life. I felt a sudden, desperate urge to drive over there, pound on his door, and demand an explanation. But then what? Create a scene? Get arrested? Give Alex Davies, the man who held my career in his hands, a perfect public reason to fire me for being an unhinged lunatic? No, I had to be smart. I had to know everything before I moved. This was no longer a personal matter. It was professional, too. Alex wasn't just a boss. He was a shark, a brilliant, cutthroat operator who had always viewed the office as his personal kingdom. And now he had stepped into my kingdom, too. I knew, with a chilling clarity, that if I confronted him emotionally, he would destroy me, personally and professionally, without blinking. I walked into the living room, picked up the remote, and turned off the TV. The silence in the apartment was deafening. I sat on the couch, staring at the phone, waiting for that dot to move, to go back to the office, to come home. Didn't. Stayed put. This whole situation felt like one of those viral stories you scroll past on your feed. The kind you read and think, that's awful, but it'll never happen to me. Well, it was happening. It was my life now. And if you're listening to this and you've ever had that moment when a single piece of evidence completely rewrites your past, drop a comment right now and let me know where you are and what time it is while you're watching this. I want to know I'm not the only one who's felt this kind of reality collapse. I spent the next few hours meticulously planning. Not yelling, not crying, but planning. I needed documentation. I took a screenshot of the GPS map with the time and address clearly visible. I cross-referenced the Olympus Tower address with public records to confirm it was indeed Alex Davies's primary residence. Every step I took was cold, calculated, and aimed at the one place where Alex Davies was most vulnerable. His pristine reputation at the firm. I wouldn't do this privately. I would confront them in front of the entire team. It was the only way to ensure I couldn't be instantly silenced. That night, after the initial shock and the cold, systematic documentation, I had to grapple with the emotional fallout, and that meant really looking at Randy, that's me, and Sarah, my wife, and what our life had become. We had been together for 8 years, married for 5. We were the couple that everyone said was rock solid. We met in college, struggled through our entry-level jobs together, celebrated every promotion, and jointly picked out the terrible, expensive couch that now sat in our living room. We were partners, equals, building a future brick by brick. My life, truthfully, was comfortable. Maybe too comfortable. I had a great job in risk analysis, steady income, a mortgage, and a routine that rarely deviated. Sarah, though, was always the more ambitious one, the spark plug. When she got the job in corporate strategy at our private firm, the same one I was already working at, I was thrilled. It was a massive step up for her. But it also started this subtle shift in our dynamic. She was the one networking late, closing deals, talking about mergers and acquisitions in hushed, important tones. I was the one making sure the bills were paid and the dog was fed. I remember thinking about 6 months ago that we were living less like a passionate couple and more like really efficient roommates. Our conversations had devolved from talking about our dreams to coordinating who would buy groceries. Intimacy was scheduled, or worse, forgotten entirely under the weight of her work stress. But the big change was the energy. Sarah had always been bubbly and warm, but lately, she'd been electric. She was dressing sharper, new blazers, designer shoes she claimed were necessary for client meetings. She was going to the gym more, and she had a new, slightly guarded way of looking at me. Whenever I'd bring up a quiet night in or a weekend trip, she'd get this tight, almost annoyed expression and say, "Randy, I have to focus on my career right now. This is a crucial time." And because I loved her, and because I saw how hard she was working, I backed off. I told myself I was being supportive, when maybe I was just being complacent. I tried to recall the last truly honest moment we'd had. Not just talking at each other, but really connecting. It had to be weeks, maybe months. I thought about the little things I'd dismissed. The way she'd wince when I reached for her phone, or how she started using a complex password when she'd always used her birthday before. I convinced myself she was just protecting client confidentiality. I was a professional risk analyst, and yet, I was minimizing every single warning sign in my own life. I pictured Sarah in my mind. Not the stressed, distant Sarah of the last few months, but the Sarah I married. The one with the slightly crooked smile and the laugh that could genuinely turn a bad day around. The thought that that woman was currently sharing air and time with Alex Davies, the man who embodied everything she was striving for, power, ambition, and ruthless success, made the bile rise in my throat. This wasn't just about a wife cheating. This was about a power dynamic twisted into a personal betrayal. She was looking up to Alex, and he was taking advantage of that ambition. And Randy, was just the boring, stable guy she came home to when the adrenaline wore off. My mind kept going back to a moment from about 2 weeks ago. We were sitting down for dinner, takeout sushi, her favorite. She was scrolling through her work emails, completely disconnected. I tried to make a joke about the terrible quality of the ginger. She looked up, gave me a small, practiced smile and said, "That's nice, honey," before her eyes immediately dropped back to her phone. It was such a small, mundane moment, but it stung. It was like I was background noise in my own life. I realized then that this distance hadn't just appeared overnight. It had been built slowly, carefully, with a shared shovel. Maybe she felt unappreciated. Maybe I had stopped being interesting. Maybe she was looking for a reflection of the drive she admired in herself, and she wasn't finding it in my comfortable predictability. These thoughts flashed through my head, but they were quickly smothered by the red-hot anger of seeing that blue on the map. No amount of marital dissatisfaction justifies a deliberate lie and a clandestine meeting at a boss's condo. The memory that truly crushed me was from just last week. It was our anniversary. Not a huge one, but still. I booked reservations at that little Italian place she loves, the one where they remember your names. She canceled at 5 p.m., citing a last-minute, non-negotiable meeting with Alex Davies about restructuring. She showed up at 10:30 p.m., smelling faintly of expensive perfume and not a little like expensive liquor. She hugged me, apologized profusely, and immediately fell asleep. I remember staring at the untouched bottle of Chianti and the wilting flowers I'd bought, and thinking, this is just how it is now. We're on different paths. But she hadn't been restructuring last week, had she? She had been building her future with Alex, a future that didn't include me sitting alone at home. It was in that moment of reflection, sitting in the dark, staring at the physical evidence on my phone, that my resolution hardened. This wasn't just about me. This was about setting a boundary, about demanding respect, not just from my wife, but from the man who commanded my professional life. Alex Davies thought he was untouchable. Sarah thought she could manage both worlds. They were wrong. And tomorrow, in the sterile, fluorescent lighting of the all-hands meeting, I was going to show them exactly how wrong. The nice, complacent Randy was gone. The risk analyst had taken over, and he was about to calculate a full-scale corporate and personal collapse. To fully understand the coming catastrophe, you need to understand the third character in this unholy trinity. Alex Davies. He wasn't just a boss, he was the boss. Alex was the managing partner of the consulting division. A man in his late 40s with prematurely silver hair, tailored suits that probably cost more than my car, and an unnerving ability to remember every minor detail of every deal he'd ever touched. Alex didn't walk, he glided. He didn't speak, he pronounced. He was charismatic, brilliant, and, frankly, terrifying. He had built his reputation on being utterly ruthless, but in a charming way. He was the kind of person who could fire you, give you an incredibly insightful analysis of why your career was failing, and still make you feel privileged to have wasted his time. My relationship with him was strictly professional, defined by a huge gulf in pay grade and power. He saw me, Randy, the risk analyst, as a necessary cog, reliable, smart with numbers, but utterly unexciting. I was the guy who ran the models that ensured his huge, flashy deals didn't implode. I was the brake to his accelerator. Sarah, however, was his protégé. She was the one he'd handpick for high-stakes presentations. She had the aggressive drive and the polish he admired. Over the last year, he had been mentoring her, bringing her into high-level meetings, and publicly singing her praises. At first, I was proud. It was a huge opportunity. But then, the mentorship started to feel less like professional guidance and more like a private, exclusive club. I remember a specific instance 3 months ago that now looks like a giant, neon warning sign. We were having the annual company outing, a ridiculously exclusive event on a rooftop bar. I was trying to talk to Alex about a complex hedging strategy, being the good little risk analyst. He listened for about 30 seconds, then clapped me on the shoulder, interrupting me mid-sentence. "Randy, my man," he'd said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Always buried in the data, aren't you? Gotta come up for air sometimes. Look at Sarah over there. That's where the action is." Sarah was across the room, surrounded by clients and executives, laughing a little too loudly at something Alex's personal attorney had said. She looked beautiful, confident, and miles away from me. Alex just chuckled, took a sip of his ridiculously expensive scotch, and added, "She's got the fire. The firm needs fire, Randy. Keeps the lights on. Data? Data just keeps the auditors happy." The comment stung. It was a subtle, dismissive stroke that simultaneously complimented Sarah and undermined me. It confirmed what I already suspected. Alex saw me as disposable and Sarah as a valuable, high-potential asset, and now I had to accept that he viewed her as a personal asset, too. His condo, the Olympus Tower residence, was another piece of the puzzle. Everyone at the firm knew he lived there. It was his symbol of arrival. He often held unofficial, after-hours meetings there, which he called strategy sessions. But these sessions were infamous for being more about expensive wine and power flexing than actual work. I had always assumed Sarah had resisted those invitations. Now, the GPS told a different, much uglier story. Alex had always exuded a sense of entitlement that bordered on narcissism. He genuinely believed that the rules that governed ordinary people, morality, fidelity, workplace ethics, simply did not apply to him. He operated in a world where power was currency, and he was the wealthiest man in the room. He could crush dissent, shift blame, and manipulate events with surgical precision. To him, my wife was probably just another perk, another thing his position entitled him to take. This deep-seated arrogance was precisely what I planned to use against him. Confronting him privately, one-on-one, would be suicide. He would deny it, belittle me, and find a professional pretext to ruin my career, painting me as an emotionally unstable employee making baseless accusations. He would leverage his power and reputation against my word. But a public confrontation? In front of the entire team, the people who reported to him, the people who whispered about his behavior in the break room? That would be different. Alex's greatest weakness was his pride and his carefully constructed image of corporate invincibility. If I could publicly introduce undeniable evidence, the GPS location, the lie about the office, I could force him onto the defensive. I could turn his charisma into a liability and his power into a cage. Remember that comment he made, "Data just keeps the auditors happy?" That was his dismissal of me, the detail-oriented analyst. But I realized that night that data, cold hard data, was the only thing that could save me. I wasn't going to confront them with tears and accusations. I was going to confront them with an audit, a presentation of facts. The thought of going up against Alex Davies in front of 20-plus colleagues, essentially committing career seppuku on the off chance of getting the truth, was terrifying. But the alternative, silently swallowing the betrayal, becoming the cuckolded husband at the office while Alex and Sarah continued their charade, was unthinkable. That blue on the map didn't just point to Alex's condo. It pointed to a professional and personal war, and I was stepping onto the battlefield. I had to calculate the risk, and the only acceptable outcome was full exposure. The realization that Sarah was lying about her location was the explosive moment, but the build-up, the routine lie, had been happening for months, eroding my trust slowly, like water on stone. It wasn't just the late nights. It was the entire performance that surrounded them. Sarah had become a master of the office hours lie. It started subtly. She'd leave the house earlier, citing morning sync-ups that never seemed to involve me, despite us working at the same firm. Then came the evening stretch. Huge deadlines, client deliverables, deck prep for the partners. The jargon was always flawless, the explanation always airtight on the surface. Randy, the supportive husband, always bought it. How could I not? I saw the ambition in her eyes. I respected her drive. I just didn't realize that drive was taking her straight to the 28th floor of the Olympus Tower. I started to mentally catalog the last few weeks, forcing myself to remember the small, telling details I had conveniently forgotten. She was coming home exhausted, yes, but not the right kind of exhausted. It wasn't the drained, defeated look of someone who'd been staring at spreadsheets for 12 hours. It was a kind of energized fatigue, the kind of crash that comes after a significant adrenaline spike. She'd be quick to shower, quick to bed, always keeping her phone face down on the nightstand. One time, I remember I tried to joke about it. We were making coffee one Saturday morning, and she was already dressed in her workout gear, ready to leave. Another high-stakes Peloton meeting? I'd asked lightly. She hadn't laughed. She'd just given me a very serious look and said, "It's not a joke, Randy. I need to be focused. This is my year." That defensiveness, that sharpness was a new feature of her personality. Any attempt I made to bridge the gap, a silly movie suggestion, an offer to cook her favorite meal, was met with a professional wall. She was in a constant state of work mode, even at home. The Miller account, the one she cited the night I checked the GPS, had been the perfect cover. It was a genuinely enormous deal for the firm, the kind of contract that would launch careers. Alex Davies was the lead partner, and Sarah was the key strategist. Naturally, I assumed the pressure was immense. She used this account as her shield and her sword. If I complained about her absence, she could effortlessly turn it back on me. "Are you suggesting I should compromise the Miller deal for a Netflix binge? Randy, this is my career." I was cornered by my own decency and belief in her professionalism. I had always prided myself on being the kind of husband who didn't hold his wife back. If she needed to work hard, I would handle everything else. I became the house manager, the appointment scheduler, the grocery shopper, her dependable, predictable anchor. And that, I realized with crushing clarity, was what made me so easy to lie to. She knew I would never question her professional commitments. My own department at the firm, risk analysis, is notoriously quiet and data-driven. We deal with hypotheticals and worst-case scenarios, not late-night schmoozing. I was content in my world of numbers, but now I saw how this contrast played out in our marriage. Sarah was dealing with the dazzling, high-energy world of corporate conquest. I was dealing with the dry reality of calculating potential failure. Alex Davies represented the flash. I represented the spreadsheet. The pattern of the lie wasn't just about the time. It was about the emotional withdrawal. Every late-night text, "Love you, babe," felt increasingly rote, like she was checking a box. It wasn't about connecting. It was about managing me. She was running a parallel life, and I was the mark she had to keep convinced. I remember distinctly the time she bought a new, expensive fragrance. I commented on it, saying it smelled great, but it wasn't her usual light, familiar scent. She just shrugged and said it was a gift from a client. But now, connecting that small detail to the faint, expensive perfume smell I noticed on her after that canceled anniversary dinner, it clicked. It wasn't a client. It was the expensive, sophisticated environment she was operating in with Alex, an environment that demanded a certain kind of presentation. The ultimate betrayal of the routine lie was how it forced me to question my memories. Were the good times real? Was her love genuine? Or was it part of a long con, a holding pattern until the right opportunity or the right man came along? This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about the years of shared history being recontextualized by a single malicious blood on a map. I had been so preoccupied with being the good husband that I failed to be the aware partner. I confused silence with stability and accepted her increasing distance as the price of her ambition. Now, sitting alone in our quiet apartment, I felt a deep, profound self-reproach. I hadn't just been lied to. I had practically encouraged the lie by being so easily manageable. And that realization fueled my need for a public reckoning. It couldn't just be about revenge. It had to be about validating my own sanity and exposing the calculated deception that had run through my marriage for months. After I confirmed the GPS location at Alex Davies's Olympus Tower condo, a switch flipped in my brain. The anxiety and the self-doubt didn't vanish, but they were overpowered by a new, corrosive impulse. Location stalker. I became obsessed with her dot. And I knew it was creepy. I knew it was a total invasion of privacy. But the betrayal was so monumental, so absolute, that my conscience had simply short-circuited. My fear of being utterly blindsided was now greater than my guilt over tracking her. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. I just watched. The little blue dot remained stationary inside the footprint of the Olympus Tower for hours. 9:47 p.m., 10:30 p.m., 11:45 p.m. Every minute the dot stayed still was another shard of glass twisting in my gut. I kept zooming in and out, half expecting the app to glitch, to show her suddenly speeding toward our apartment. But it didn't move. It was the most boring, terrifying watch party of my life. I felt like a spy in my own home monitoring a target. I was the dedicated risk analyst, finally applying my professional skills to the disaster that was my personal life. I was collecting data, and the data was overwhelmingly bleak. Around 1:30 a.m., I got a brief spike of adrenaline. The dot moved. It left the Olympus Tower and started moving quickly across town. My heart hammered. Was she coming home? Was she on her way to apologize? No. The dot headed south, toward the affluent residential area where a lot of the firm's senior executives lived. She stopped briefly, for less than 5 minutes, near a large, anonymous house, which I later cross-referenced as the residence of Marcus Thorne, the head of capital markets. Then the dot moved again, finally heading in the direction of our place. She walked in at 2:05 a.m. I was sitting on the couch, the apartment completely dark, phone clutched in my hand. The light from the hallway spilled over her as she closed the door. She looked surprised to see me there. "Randy, what are you doing up?" she whispered, sounding tired, but not stressed. She had her office exhaustion voice on. I put on my best, convincingly weary voice. I had to play the part of the oblivious husband. I knew if she sensed anything, she would immediately delete the app, the evidence, and deny everything. "Couldn't sleep, honey. Had a weird stomach ache. How was the meeting? Did you nail the Miller presentation?" I asked, forcing a smile. She sighed, dropped her briefcase with a heavy thud, and walked over to me, planting a quick, dry kiss on my forehead. "It was brutal, Randy. Absolute fire drill. Alex is demanding a complete overhaul of the pricing structure by tomorrow's all hands. I literally just finished. I'm dead." She went straight to the bathroom, and I could hear the shower running almost immediately. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, it was almost admirable. She had just spent 4 hours at Alex's condo, made a brief, mysterious stop elsewhere, and was now here, claiming she'd been in the trenches at the office. While she was showering, I quickly grabbed her briefcase. I know, more stalking, but I was beyond the pale now. I fumbled with the locks. She always used a combination I knew. Inside, it was mostly tidy, but I found what I was looking for. The Miller account file. I pulled it out. The documents were clean, crisp, and suspiciously untouched. There were no coffee rings, no frantic scribbles, no tired-looking notes on the margins. The hallmarks of an all-night crunch session. They looked exactly as they had when I saw them on our dining room table yesterday. The paperwork didn't support the brutal fire drill narrative. More data collected. I slipped the file back and sat back down just as she emerged from the bedroom, now in her pajamas, hair wrapped in a towel. "Need anything?" she asked, already half asleep. "No, just worried about the all hands tomorrow." I lied. "You sure you got enough sleep?" "Yeah, I'm fine. Just gotta power through," she muttered, already pulling the covers up. She was asleep within minutes. I stayed awake, watching her breathe, feeling nothing but a strange, clinical detachment. The woman lying next to me was a stranger, an actress. She had constructed a perfectly seamless alibi. But she hadn't accounted for the digital trail. She hadn't accounted for the paranoia of a risk analyst scorned. The next morning, before she was up, I checked the app again. I set up a geofence alert, a virtual boundary around the Olympus Tower and our office. If her phone crossed either boundary, I would know instantly. I had become the system of checks and balances for my own broken marriage. As we both got ready for work, the tension was so thick I could practically taste it. Sarah was unnaturally upbeat, humming a pop song as she applied her makeup. She looked fresh, ready for the day, ready for the confrontation I knew she didn't see coming. I, on the other hand, felt hollow, running on pure adrenaline and cold logic. I was going to the office with one goal, the execution of the plan formulated in the deepest hours of the night. My primary tool? A screenshot on my phone. My secondary tool? The mandatory all-hands team meeting where everyone, Sarah, Alex, and all their colleagues, would be trapped in the room together. The moment the digital proof became undeniable, the guilt of the invasion of privacy dissolved completely. I was ready to use the data to expose the lie. I walked into the office the next morning with a kind of hyper-awareness I hadn't felt since my college finals. The air conditioning unit hummed too loudly. The synthetic carpet felt coarse under my dress shoes. Every single mundane detail of the private firm, the setting of my professional life, felt alien, charged with impending disaster. I saw Sarah first. She was at her desk, sipping coffee, already engrossed in a call. She glanced up, gave me a quick, distracted wave, and immediately returned to her conversation, dropping in phrases like synergistic alignment and optimizing the tranche structure. The performance was flawless. She was playing the role of the busy, successful corporate strategist, and she looked utterly convincing. The fact that she had just crawled into bed after a secret rendezvous only cemented the depth of the deception. Alex Davies swept in 20 minutes later. He didn't just walk, he commanded the space. He stopped by Sarah's desk, not mine, and leaned in close, his voice a low, confidential murmur. I watched from my cubicle, my stomach twisting. They shared a private chuckle about something. He patted her lightly on the shoulder, a gesture that was simultaneously paternal, encouraging, and now, to my eyes, sickeningly intimate. He was playing the role of the esteemed mentor, and she, the ambitious protégé. I sat at my desk, my entire focus fixed on the phone in my pocket. I had to wait until the all-hands meeting. But then, around 8:45 a.m., the phone vibrated with a short, sharp notification. My heart rate instantly spiked. I pulled it out, trying to look casual, like I was checking a stock quote. It was the GPS alert. A new log entry. Location: Olympus Tower time, 8:42 a.m. My brain stuttered. What? She was right here. I looked up. Sarah was still at her desk, still on her call, still performing. I looked back at the phone. The dot wasn't on our office. The dot was back at Alex Davies's condo. The initial fear and uncertainty of the night before vanished, replaced by the cold, pure rage of the condo confirmation. This wasn't a one-off mistake or a late-night lapse in judgment. This was an ongoing, active deception. This meant that the phone I was tracking was not the phone she had with her. I felt a sickening wave of nausea. All my planning, my cold, hard data was compromised. I had spent the night validating the location of a device that she hadn't even brought home. This meant two things. She had left the tracked phone, her work phone, or maybe an old device, at Alex's condo to establish a false alibi for the whole night. She had another, untracked phone, her primary phone, which she was currently using at her desk. I quickly checked the Find My Friends settings on my own device. Sure enough, the shared location was being broadcast from the device labeled Sarah's office backup. I had been tracking the ghost of a phone, a phantom of her real movements. The whole alibi was a setup, a carefully planted piece of evidence designed to confirm her supposed all-nighter at the firm, if I were ever to check. But wait, why was the phone still at the Olympus Tower at 8:42 a.m.? She had clearly left hours ago. That device, the backup phone, was sitting there, broadcasting its location from Alex's home, nearly 2 hours after she had arrived at the office. This single data point was the undeniable truth. The phone wasn't just used for an alibi. It had been left at Alex's place, perhaps accidentally, or perhaps because she knew she couldn't risk carrying two phones and making a mistake. It didn't matter. The bottom line, the phone Sarah used for work, the one she told me she needed for the Miller account, was currently residing in my boss's apartment. This new development, while terrifying, actually solidified my plan. It made the confrontation simpler, more devastating, and purely professional. I didn't need to argue about where she was last night. I could focus on where her professional materials were right now, in direct contravention of company policy. I took another, more precise screenshot of the current GPS location, timestamp and address clearly visible. This wasn't just a late-night fling. This was a serious breach of professional conduct, compromising the security of firm assets. I was no longer the distraught husband. I was the risk analyst flagging a massive security vulnerability. I felt a surge of cold, focused determination. The betrayal was deeper than I thought, but the professional exposure was now absolute. Alex Davies had brought the phone to his condo, and he or Sarah had carelessly left it there. A live GPS beacon broadcasting the exact location of their deceit to the entire digital world. They had given me a weapon more potent than any tearful accusation. I slipped the phone into my jacket pocket. The time for the all-hands meeting was 9:30 a.m. I had 45 minutes to internalize the new plan. I was going to use the current location of her work phone to expose their lie. The blue dot had just delivered the smoking gun, and I was ready to fire it in front of the whole team. The 45 minutes before the all-hands meeting were the most surreal of my life. I was running on pure survival instinct, meticulously rehearsing the scene in my mind. Sleep deprivation had stripped away my emotional barriers, leaving only a cold, analytical core. I was in a state of crisis management, and the crisis involved destroying my marriage and risking my career in one fell swoop. I had to be surgical. Any hint of emotional instability, any tear, any yell, and Alex Davies would dismiss me as a jealous, deranged husband and use his considerable power to have me escorted out, effectively burying the incident. I had to go in as Randy, the meticulous risk analyst, presenting evidence of a professional violation. My first thought after realizing the phone was a plant was to confront Sarah privately. But I immediately rejected it. A private confrontation would be easily denied, minimized, and managed. She would cry, he would deny, and I would be left with nothing but doubt and the wreckage of my home life. No, this had to happen in the open, where the consequences were instant and irreversible for all three of us. The entire team, investors, analysts, project managers, and directors, was the audience, and they were the only true check on Alex's power. I spent 10 minutes in the fire escape stairwell, silently repeating my script. It wasn't about the affair itself. It was about the breach of security and trust. Sarah stated she was working on the Miller account at the office. Her work device, containing highly confidential data, is currently broadcasting from the personal residence of Mr. Davies, an extreme violation of firm policy regarding client data and off-site security protocols. I have the digital evidence. I focused on the key terms: confidential data, violation of firm policy, digital evidence. These were the words that would activate the professional alarms in the room, bypassing the personal drama. I debated bringing the second screenshot, the 9:46 p.m. one from the previous night, but decided against it. It was too personal, too easily reframed as stalking. The 8:42 a.m. location, the phone sitting there right now during business hours while she was pretending to work, was the cleaner, more devastating piece of professional evidence. It implied that the condo was the actual unauthorized satellite office for this account, compromising the entire Miller contract. The anxiety was immense, yet controlled. I felt a weird kinship with those disaster movie heroes who calmly calculate the trajectory of the meteor seconds before impact. This wasn't just about truth. It was about leverage. I knew that Alex Davies would fight back hard. He would attack my credibility, my job performance, anything to deflect. I had to be prepared for the counterattack. What if he claimed the phone was his? No, it was clearly labeled Sarah's office backup. What if he claimed Sarah dropped it off by mistake? Unlikely, given the 4-hour time difference and the fact that she had been present at the office for almost 2 hours. What if he fired me on the spot? That was the most likely outcome, but by making the accusation public, I would ensure that the reason for my firing would ripple through the industry, potentially costing Alex and the firm more in reputational damage than I cost in salary. It was a mutual destruction scenario, and I was willing to pull the pin. I walked into the conference room exactly 3 minutes before the meeting started. Alex was already there, leaning against the presentation screen, chatting easily with 2 VPs. Sarah walked in a moment later, finding a seat near the middle. She met my eyes briefly, gave a slightly impatient frown. The look that said, "Focus, Randy, we're working." I found an empty chair near the door, a strategic choice. Easy access to leave if things went south, and a position that allowed me to view everyone in the room. My hands were clammy, but my breathing was slow and measured. As people settled in, the usual pre-meeting corporate banter filled the room. Coffee cups clinked. People discussed sports and weekend plans. It was the calm before the storm. I watched Alex Davies, so confident, so powerful, entirely unaware that the man he had dismissed as a background character was about to pull the rug out from under his meticulously constructed life. The final bell rang at 9:30 a.m. Alex straightened up, tapping the screen to bring up the first slide. He gave his signature, booming opening. "Good morning, team. Let's get right to it. The focus of today's all hands is singular, the Miller account. As you know, this is a watershed moment for the firm, and thanks to the extraordinary dedication of our strategy lead, Sarah." He paused, gesturing dramatically towards Sarah, who gave a modest, professional nod. My heart was beating so hard I was sure the guy next to me could hear it. This was the moment. He had just set the stage, praising her for the very project I was about to use to expose them both. I adjusted my tie, took one last deep, steadying breath, and waited for my opening. The agonizing night of doubt and planning was over. It was time for execution. Alex Davies continued his corporate sermon, projecting an image of total confidence. He was deep into describing the synergy, a word I had always hated, of the Miller account, completely oblivious to the digital bomb I was holding in my pocket. Sarah was nodding, playing the dutiful star. The atmosphere was the standard, fluorescent-lit calm of a high-stakes corporate environment. And then, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to intercede before he moved on to the next agenda item, and my opening closed forever. My heart was a drum against my ribs, but my voice, when it came, was shockingly steady. "Mr. Davies," I interrupted, raising my hand slightly, maintaining a respectful but firm demeanor. The room instantly quieted. Interrupting Alex Davies was simply not done, and 20 pairs of eyes, including Sarah's, which were now wide and annoyed, snapped to me. Alex looked irritated, but he masked it with a paternalistic smile. "Yes, Randy, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but your segment on risk projection is later in the deck. Are we seeing an immediate fluctuation in the market?" He was subtly challenging me, reminding the room that my job was numbers, not strategy. "No, sir. This isn't about market fluctuation," I said, rising slowly from my chair, keeping my tone measured, almost academic. "This is about risk management, specifically a critical internal security breach related to the Miller account data." The shift in the room was palpable. Security breaches were serious. 2 VPs stopped scrolling through their phones. Sarah's professional smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer bewilderment. Alex, instinctively knowing how to control the room, remained calm. "A security breach? Randy, please don't be vague. State your concern clearly, and we'll address it after this presentation. This is neither the time nor the place for hypotheticals." "With respect, sir, the time is now because the breach is ongoing," I insisted, taking a step toward the front of the room. I pulled my phone from my pocket, deliberately holding it out for everyone to see the screen, the GPS map and the little blue dot. "Sarah," I said, addressing her directly, my voice cutting through the silence like ice. "You assured me, and presumably Mr. Davies, that you have been working tirelessly on the Miller account. And just minutes ago, you were here, at your desk, finalizing details for this meeting." She stammered, "I was Randy. What is your point? This is completely inappropriate." I ignored her, focusing instead on Alex and the stunned VPs. "My point, Alex, is the location of the confidential firm assets. The work device Sarah uses for the Miller account, clearly labeled Sarah's office backup, is not in this building. According to the firm's security policy, confidential client information must be protected at all times, especially off-site." I zoomed in on the screenshot I had taken just an hour ago and projected it onto the large conference room screen, using the room's wireless connection. The map filled the huge screen, a clear overhead view of the Olympus Tower, with the distinct address text overlaying the blue dot. The timestamp, 8:42 a.m., was undeniable. "At 8:42 this morning," I continued, speaking clearly and deliberately, "while Sarah was here in the office, this firm-issued device, containing all the strategy and financial models for the highly sensitive Miller account, was broadcasting its location from this exact address, 1400 Olympus Tower, Unit 2801. I paused, letting the address, Alex Davies's personal, known condo unit sink in. The room erupted in a sudden, sharp intake of breath. The murmur of confusion turned into horrified understanding. Alex's face, usually so controlled, went pale. Sarah had her hand covering her mouth, her eyes darting between me and Alex, the realization of her careless mistake dawning on her. "Now, Alex," I challenged, turning to him fully. "As the managing partner, can you explain why highly confidential firm assets, the sole property of the firm, were left overnight at your personal residence? Furthermore, why are they still there during core business hours? And why did Sarah misrepresent their location and her professional activities, which is a clear violation of both our professional conduct and security protocols?" This was it. The public shot was fired. I had framed the entire betrayal as a corporate crime, a data breach, and a failure of leadership. The data was irrefutable. I had forced Alex Davies to defend his professional judgment and reputation, not just his personal life. The entire room was now waiting for his response, trapped witnesses to the dismantling of his authority. The air in the conference room was thick with professional terror and morbid fascination. Everyone was frozen, staring from the undeniable proof on the screen, the Olympus Tower address to Alex Davies. My professional gamble had paid off. I had bypassed the personal shame and landed squarely on the biggest corporate taboo: compromised data security. Alex, however, was a master of performance. For a split second, his face showed raw panic, but he instantly plastered on a look of contemptuous disbelief. He didn't raise his voice. He lowered it, making the entire room lean in to hear the counterattack. "Randy," Alex began, his voice dripping with condescension, "I'm going to overlook the immense impropriety of you hijacking a critical strategy meeting for what appears to be a deeply personal and highly irregular accusation. You are clearly under stress, and your data analysis skills, while useful, do not extend to interpreting simple technology." He walked over to the screen, dismissively waving his hand at the projected map. "That device, the backup phone, as you call it, is clearly malfunctioning. This is a GPS anomaly, a common occurrence in high-rise buildings. We all know Sarah was here last night and this morning, preparing this crucial presentation. To suggest otherwise, based on a faulty signal, is reckless, unprofessional, and frankly, deeply concerning behavior from an employee in risk management." He turned to the VPs and directors, appealing to their common sense. "Are we going to stop a multimillion-dollar deal because one of our analysts is having a technical difficulty with a 3-year-old firm phone? No. Sarah, please confirm for the team exactly where you spent the bulk of the night finalizing the Miller deck." Sarah, regaining a measure of control, seized the lifeline Alex had thrown her. She stood up, her jaw tight, embodying the wronged professional. "I spent the entire night at my desk here at the firm, preparing this data. Anyone who was here late last night, Mark, Jessica, can confirm I was working until after midnight. The idea that Randy is tracking my location using personal apps on firm devices is an absolute violation of my privacy and HR policy. I was here. This is a technical error, or worse, a deliberate fabrication driven by what I can only assume is some kind of emotional distress on Randy's part." She was good. She immediately pivoted the narrative from their violation to my breach of privacy and emotional instability. The room was divided. Some people were clearly buying the GPS error line, eager to believe the powerful boss. Others, however, had seen the look on Alex's face and knew a cover-up when they saw one. "A technical error?" I interjected, stepping forward, refusing to back down. "With all due respect, Alex, that's simply not true. I am in risk analysis. I understand GPS functionality. The device is reporting from a fixed interior location, which indicates it's stationary and reporting correctly, even if it's not the correct location. And Sarah, if you were here, why does the phone, the firm asset containing client data, remain at Alex's personal residence right now, at 9:40 a.m. Alex cut me off sharply. "Enough, Randy. You're finished. I've heard enough of your unfounded accusations. This meeting is for professionals, not domestic disputes. Security, please remove Mr. Randy from the premises." He is clearly unable to function in a professional capacity. He had pulled the ultimate power move, immediate termination and removal. The security guard, who had been lingering by the door, started walking toward me. This was my last stand. I had to plant one more seed of doubt, one final piece of evidence that would stick, even after I was gone. Before I go, Alex, and before you fabricate a termination report, I said, my voice rising slightly, ensuring it was loud enough for every ear. Ask Sarah about the stop she made this morning, around 1:30 a.m. After she left the Olympus Tower, she stopped for 5 minutes on the way home, just before she arrived back at our apartment. I let that hang in the air, the implication of a second clandestine stop immediately adding a layer of confusion and complexity to their simple GPS error defense. I watched Alex's eyes flick to Sarah, a brief, sharp inquiry. Sarah's face, which had been set in professional indignation, suddenly cracked. She looked truly terrified. She knew that I hadn't just tracked the backup phone. I had seen the full movements of the primary device she had been carrying. Her composure completely broke, and she blurted out, not to Alex, but to the room. It wasn't what you think. It was about the Miller account. I went to see Marcus Thorne. It was a critical, last-minute legal detail. The room plunged into silence again. She hadn't denied the affair or the Olympus Tower visit. She had just complicated the professional cover story. And in that moment of panicked confession, the power shifted again. Marcus Thorne, the head of capital markets, was suddenly a new, unexpected player in this game, and Sarah's attempt to use a work connection as a shield was about to lead to a truly jaw-dropping reversal. Sarah's frantic, defensive mention of Marcus Thorne, the head of capital markets, was the chaos Alex needed to regain his footing. He saw the shift in the room's focus, from adultery to corporate maneuvering, and jumped on it like a predator. He let out a short, sharp, disbelieving laugh, aimed squarely at me. Thorne? Seriously, Randy? Now you're dragging the head of capital markets into your domestic fantasy? This is exactly the kind of unhinged escalation I warned you about. He turned to the security guard, who was now standing awkwardly beside me. Escort him out. Now, I want his key card deactivated and his personal effects boxed immediately. We have a major client presentation to salvage. But before the guard could touch my arm, one of the VPs, David Chen, an older, respected figure in the firm, spoke up. David was conservative, a stickler for procedure, and clearly disturbed by the data breach angle. Hold on, Alex, David said, his voice calm but authoritative. We can't fire Randy before we get an answer to his professional question. The location data is disturbing. If Sarah's work phone is at your residence, that's an unacceptable breach of data security, regardless of the personal context. Randy's job is risk analysis. He's flagging a legitimate risk. He looked pointedly at Sarah. Sarah, you just mentioned Marcus Thorne. Was the meeting with Mr. Davies last night officially sanctioned and documented? And if so, why did you feel the need to mislead your husband about your location? Alex shot David a venomous look but was forced to stand down. David Chen's intervention had validated my professional argument. Alex, realizing he couldn't simply crush me, adopted the concerned executive persona. David, of course, let's maintain composure. Sarah, explain the situation regarding your phone and the Olympus Tower address. Let's put this technical error to rest so we can focus. Sarah, still visibly rattled by my mention of Marcus Thorne, swallowed hard and started to weave a new, complex lie that tried to merge the truth of her movements with a professional excuse. The phone issue is a technical error, she insisted, rushing her words. I was working at the office until late. Alex, Mr. Davies was also here. When we were leaving, he realized he'd forgotten a crucial client document, a hard copy, that he needed for an early morning meeting with a potential investor at his home. I volunteered to drive him to the Olympus Tower, just to drop off the document, because I was heading home anyway. She paused, looking directly at Alex for affirmation. He gave a sharp, subtle nod. When I was there, Sarah continued, her voice gaining false confidence, I was helping him look for the document, and I accidentally left my firm-issued backup phone on his kitchen counter. It wasn't intentional. I just rushed off because I was so exhausted. I was so focused on the Miller account that the phone slip-up happened. I left the tower, and I realized I needed a final legal review of the prospectus. I knew Marcus Thorne lived nearby, so I made a quick stop at his residence, the 1:30 a.m. stop Randy mentioned, to get his sign-off. It was a purely professional, necessary maneuver to secure the Miller deal. It was a brilliant counter-narrative, painting her as a dedicated, selfless employee who made a careless technical mistake. Alex's presence at the firm was her alibi, the lost document was the reason for the condo visit, and the Marcus Thorne stop was evidence of her tireless, purely professional drive. Alex immediately seized the narrative. "Thank you, Sarah. That explains it. It was a chain of unfortunate, yet understandable, operational errors driven by the extreme pressure of the Miller account. The breach wasn't intentional, it was circumstantial. Randy, while I appreciate you flagging the asset location, as is your job, your reaction, the public accusation, and the inference of infidelity in a professional setting, remains wildly inappropriate. You risked the entire room's focus and the firm's stability over a misunderstanding." He looked at me with cold fury. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately, for gross misconduct and creating a hostile work environment. Collect your final check from HR." He thought he had won. He had minimized the affair, contained the data breach, and eliminated the whistleblower, all in front of his peers. He looked like the firm hand of leadership correcting a disturbance. But I wasn't done. The data was faulty, but my gut wasn't. I had one final question, a detail that didn't fit her frantic explanation. "One moment, Alex. One final question for Sarah, if David will permit it," I said, looking at David Chun, who gave a slow, cautious nod. "Sarah, you said you drove Alex to his condo to drop off a document. If you were only dropping him off and leaving immediately, and you were so tired, why would you leave your phone on his kitchen counter and not notice its absence for 7 hours? Furthermore, if you were just dropping off a document, why did your GPS indicate your phone was stationary inside his unit for 4 full hours?" I held my breath, waiting for the gap in their story to break their composure. Sarah's eyes widened, her carefully constructed facade finally trembling. She had accounted for the where and the when, but not the duration of the stay. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could formulate another lie, a sound came from the door. The sound was a throat-clearing, loud, resonant, and accompanied by the sudden, looming presence of Marcus Thorne himself, standing in the doorway of the conference room. He was holding a large manila envelope and looked deeply uncomfortable, but resolute. He had clearly heard the tail end of the commotion. The appearance of Marcus Thorne was like a thunderclap in the room. He was the most senior executive outside of Alex, a man known for his integrity, and his sudden presence instantly nullified Alex's attempt to assert control. Alex's face went from pale to a dangerous shade of crimson. Sarah looked like she was about to faint. Marcus, tall and imposing, held the manila envelope like it was a prop in a terrible play. He looked at Sarah, then at Alex, then finally settled his gaze on me. "Randy, the guy who had nothing to lose. I apologize for the intrusion," Marcus said, his voice deep and measured. "But I think I need to clarify something. Sarah mentioned my name, implying she visited me at 1:30 a.m. to finalize a legal prospectus for the Miller account. That is incorrect." The silence returned, but this time it was absolute. Felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Alex started to move, trying to intercept Marcus, but the older man held up a hand. "Alex, please, let's maintain professional decorum, as you requested earlier. I was asleep at 1:30 a.m. My security system and my wife can attest to that. Sarah did drive by my house last night, or early this morning, but she didn't come in. She only stopped for exactly 4 minutes, and the reason for that stop," Marcus looked down at the envelope in his hand, "was this." He walked the few steps over to the conference table and placed the heavy envelope down. It was official firm stationery, sealed with red wax. Sarah was not dropping off legal documents. She was delivering a preliminary letter of resignation to me, specifically to my home, at 1:35 a.m. The revelation landed with brutal force. Resignation? Sarah? The ambitious strategist obsessed with the Miller account? I felt my heart stop. I stared at Sarah. She had just spent the last hour meticulously building a narrative around her devotion to the firm, and Marcus had just produced a signed document proving she was planning to quit. This wasn't about her career. It was about her escape. Alex, recovering with lightning speed, slammed his hand on the table. Marcus, this is confidential and completely irrelevant. We are discussing a data breach, not personnel filings. It is entirely relevant, Alex, Marcus countered, meeting Alex's fury with calm dignity, because it clarifies the true nature of Sarah's activities. Alex, I was concerned about Sarah's sudden desire to leave the firm, especially given her pivotal role in Miller. When I asked her about the resignation early this morning, she told me she was planning to take a few months off. But she also told me something else that is absolutely relevant to the professional breach Randy flagged. Marcus turned to the VPs, ensuring they were listening. The real reason Sarah was at the Olympus Tower condo last night was not to deliver a document to Alex, and it certainly wasn't about the Miller account, not in the way you think. Sarah was there because she was negotiating a job offer. Negotiating a job offer. Not an affair. Not a clandestine tryst. A negotiation. The collective gasp in the room was deafening. A job offer? David Chun whispered, completely bewildered. Yes, a very high-level, lucrative position, Marcus confirmed. From the Miller Group itself. Sarah was being poached. She was meeting with the chief strategy officer of the Miller Group, a man named Edward Cross, who happens to be a close personal friend of Alex Davies, and who was utilizing Alex's private condo as a neutral, off-the-books meeting location to avoid corporate espionage rules. My mind spun. Alex wasn't sleeping with my wife. He was brokering a corporate deal for her. The Olympus Tower wasn't a love nest. It was a clandestine hiring office. Sarah had been lying, yes, but not about who she was seeing. She was lying about why. She wasn't cheating on me with Alex. She was secretly using Alex's influence to leapfrog her career with his client. The work phone, Marcus continued, glancing at the projected GPS map. Sarah's backup phone. She told me she was instructed to leave it behind. Mr. Cross, a stickler for corporate ethics, demanded all firm-issued devices be left outside the meeting room to prevent any recording or data harvesting that could compromise the deal between Sarah and Miller Group. Alex was acting as the fixer, ensuring the meeting went smoothly. The full, shocking picture was now visible. Sarah had lied to me, telling me she was working because the truth, that she was using her position to be poached by a major client with the help of my boss, was an ethical violation that would have ruined her career before the deal was signed. The entire structure of the lie wasn't to hide infidelity, but to hide an aggressive, high-stakes corporate defection. I looked at Sarah. The terror was gone, replaced by a look of sheer, exhausted relief, mixed with deep shame. She hadn't betrayed our wedding vows, but she had betrayed the fundamental trust of our relationship and her professional integrity. Alex, completely exposed, simply lowered his head, his image of professional integrity completely shattered. He hadn't been facilitating an affair. He had been facilitating a poaching deal with a major client, a deeply unethical conflict of interest that could jeopardize the entire Miller contract for the firm. Marcus Thorne had just dismantled both Alex's command and Sarah's carefully constructed professional life. The immediate aftermath of Marcus Thorne's revelation was a kind of stunned corporate decompression. The intense personal drama evaporated, replaced by the grim reality of a major ethical conflict of interest and massive professional fallout. Alex Davies was not a cheating husband. He was a highly unethical boss who was essentially renting out his apartment to help a major client poach the firm's top talent. Sarah wasn't a cheating wife. She was a secretly ambitious employee willing to torch her current job for a huge salary jump, using a calculated lie to shield her moves. The tension in the room remained, but its nature changed. It wasn't about sex. It was about money and power. Alex tried one last, desperate maneuver. Marcus, this is completely overblown. I was merely introducing Sarah to the CSO as a professional courtesy before she submitted her resignation. No one was compromised. Marcus, however, was done playing his game. Alex, you facilitated a clandestine meeting with a client's C-suite executive in your private residence concerning a major contract that is currently being negotiated, and you provided a cover story for her professional absence. The ethical review on this will be severe. The Miller deal itself is now at risk because of this appearance of impropriety. You are hereby placed on immediate administrative leave, pending a full investigation by the Corporate Ethics Board. With those words, Marcus Thorne, the man who had been the silent audience, summarily dethroned Alex Davies. Alex's face was a mask of cold, defeated fury. He didn't fight back. He just picked up his notes and stalked out, his immense power dissolving with every step. The room cleared out quickly after that, the VPs and directors scrambling to protect their own positions and distance themselves from the explosion. Only Sarah, Marcus, David Chun, and I remained. Sarah walked over to me, her shoulders slumped. Her eyes were red, but dry. She looked me straight in the eye. "Randy," she whispered, her voice rough with emotion. "I am so sorry. I lied to you, not because of Alex, but because I didn't want you to think I was a snake. I knew what I was doing was professionally murky, and I didn't know how to tell you I was planning to leave everything. Our life, our plan, for a sudden, massive career move. I was so focused on the exit strategy that I completely lost sight of you." I stared at her, the exhaustion of the sleepless night finally hitting me. "You used my own predictability against me, Sarah. You knew I'd assume the professional pressure, not the personal deception. Why the elaborate lie about the office? Why leave the phone there? I was terrified you'd check my location and see I was at Alex's place," she admitted, the shame heavy in her voice. "Alex suggested I leave my less important work phone behind to make it look like I'd been at the office all night, just in case someone checked my location. It was a stupid, calculated risk, and I took it. The resolution was bittersweet, confusing, and profoundly sad. My marriage wasn't destroyed by a fiery betrayal of lust, but by a cold, calculating betrayal of ambition and trust. The lie wasn't adultery. It was a deeply selfish corporate maneuver. In a strange, twisted way, I was relieved, but the wound of the dishonesty felt just as deep. She had been willing to lie about her location, her intentions, and her professional ethics just to secure a deal. Marcus Thorne cleared his throat. "Randy, you handled this with extraordinary composure. You risked your career to flag a major security and ethical breach, and you were proven correct. I want you to know the firm owes you a great deal. Your job is not only safe, but I think we need to talk about promoting you to a senior internal auditor role." I simply nodded, my mind unable to process a promotion while my marriage was on life support. Sarah and I walked out together in silence. The private firm office, the setting for our entire professional and much of our personal life, now felt toxic. When we got to our apartment building, she stopped at the entrance. "I need time, Randy," she said, clutching the resignation letter I now knew was in her purse. "I need to figure out what I've become and what I want. This job offer, this whole thing, it showed me a side of myself that is ruthless, and I don't know if I like it. I'm going to stay with my sister for a while." I looked at the woman I loved, the woman who hadn't betrayed me sexually but had betrayed the core principle of our partnership. "I understand," I finally said. "Go. And when you come back, we need to decide if we were building a life together or just two separate, successful careers." She nodded, tears finally pooling in her eyes, and walked away. The final, lingering question I was left with, sitting alone in our quiet apartment, was this: which betrayal is worse? The passionate betrayal of the body, or the cold, calculated betrayal of trust and shared future? She said she was working late, and in a way, she was working late on a deal that sacrificed our honesty for her ambition. The truth was far more complex and far more painful than simple infidelity. Thank you for listening to my story. If this video resonated with you, or if you've ever had to deal with a lie that was more complicated than the truth, please drop a comment, like, and subscribe to The Office Hours. I'll see you next time.